Then comes a Max Player, Sole Volante, and the field is at the top of the stretch, and there goes Tiz the Law now to take over. It's Tiz the Law in front in the stretch, and there's an eighth of a mile to the finish. Dr. Post moves up on the outside into second, but it is Tiz the Law, and the New York bred is going to win New York's Belmont Stakes, the first leg of the 2020 Triple Crown. Tiz the Law by 4 lengths.
Okay, so we are back on YouTube today on Racing Rundown, and as you can tell by the title, we're going to be doing a preview of the Travers Stakes, but this is going to kind of be different than what we normally do for a lot of the previews. We normally don't spend too much time going in-depth on every horse. We're going to go a little bit more in-depth in this race, and kind of similar to how the Kentucky Derby preview for Racing Rundown is going to work for once we get to that, kind of a bit of a trial run here. Only 8 horses for the Travers, so not as many as we maybe were hoping to get, but it's still the top in this race are very much make the race worth watching, especially the Belmont Stakes winner, Tiz the Law, back. We've talked about him enough on this show, and we're going to talk about him even more. I would also like to mention that later on this week, Jay Pribman will be joining me, and we're going to be doing some more Travers discussion with him. That'll be separate from this video. I was thinking about combining them, but I decided that it would be best to split those up. But before we get to anything else, I do just want to quickly run through the Travers field. The one is First Line, who most recently broke his maiden on his 4th try. 2 is Country Grammar, last out winner of the Peter Pan Stakes. 3 is Uncle Chuck, who won the Los Alamitos Derby last out. 4 is Max Player, who was 3rd to Tiz the Law in the Belmont Stakes. 5 is Shivery, who his biggest effort, one that most people probably remember from him, is a 2nd to Tiz the Law in the Florida Derby. 6 is obviously Tiz the Law. 7 is Caracarro. He was 2nd behind Country Grammar in the Peter Pan. And 8th is South Bend, who's been bouncing around a lot of black-type races and most recently was 2nd in the Ohio Derby last out. So those are the 8 horses. We'll start with the number 1 horse, First Line, and I'll just say right off the bat, I don't really have much to say about First Line. It took him 4 tries to break his maiden, and the 4th try, he won that race by a half length, and it's not like he's coming into this race off of a convincing maiden score. He's coming into this race off of an iffy maiden score. He kind of seems like there's no Calumet Farm horses in here, but Brad Kelly's the butt of a lot of jokes a lot. He seems like the very typical Brad Kelly horse that's entered in Brad Kelly Calumet horse, I should be more specific, that's entered in these Grade 1 races that a lot of people don't really take too seriously. That's as much as I have to say about him. I'll give Eric the opportunity to talk about him, but that's what my judgment on First Line is.
Yeah, and this horse isn't a bad horse, however. The very short layoff is obviously very concerning. These are connections that are usually ambitious in their placements of horses, and listen, last weekend when I was watching the national coverage of Saratoga and this horse broke his maiden, the connections right after said Travers, and you could just tell that they were a little over-ambitious about it in the moment, and they've never really seemed to get off that high. So he's an automatic toss for me, and nothing about that last race tells me he's going to beat Tiz the Law, Uncle Chuck, or anybody for that matter.
A lot of this race, and rightfully so, is going to be just looking at the other competitors in this race in regards to whether or not they can run well against the top 2, those being Tiz the Law and Uncle Chuck. And Country Grammar is a very interesting horse. I would say, off of his win in the Peter Pan, he looks like a very, very nice stakes-level horse that, obviously he is a Grade 3 winner of the Peter Pan, and I think, down the road he's definitely going to be able to he's definitely going to factor in a lot of races. He definitely looks to have some talent, but the question is off that Peter Pan, can he beat a horse like a Tiz the Law or an Uncle Chuck? And I would say I don't think that off that Peter Pan effort I would give him necessarily the best chance to beat a horse like Tiz the Law, but that being said, I don't think that Country Grammar is a bad horse. I think that he definitely is a horse that I would put in the good rank, and if he doesn't qualify for the Kentucky Derby out of this race, which, that remains to be seen whether or not he does that, I would peg him for a race like the Jim Dandy on Kentucky Derby weekend, but at Saratoga. So I think ultimately Country Grammar has the potential to be a good horse, but I don't think he's going to beat Tiz the Law here.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with you, Jack. It's interesting. He's a good horse, but And if you look at his efforts against tougher horses, that Peter Pan field wasn't too strong. But his 2 and 3 starts back, 5th in the Fountain of Youth, well beaten by Ete Indian, who I would definitely consider a Grade 1 level horse. And 2 starts back, lost to Tap It to Win, who was well bet in the Belmont, came back and placed in the Allen Jerkins last weekend. So while he runs good races seemingly every time, he also just seems like he's a cut below the top horses in this crop, and I don't really see that changing. That was a nice Peter Pan win, but he's going to still have to improve a lot to tell me he can beat the better horses in this race, just like a lot of the horses in this Travers.
The number 3 horse is Uncle Chuck, the Los Alamitos Derby winner. And, he is the Bob Baffert contender for this race. And Uncle Chuck comes into this race with a lot of promise. I would say the one knock you could have for him is he hasn't run against the real top-level horses, so he isn't battle-tested. But I would say that at the most, is probably a nitpick for someone who's, looking at him and trying to find a way to beat him. I would say, if Tiz the Law wasn't in this race, then Uncle Chuck would be very prohibitive favorite, and I think Uncle Chuck is definitely going to be very well bet. A lot of people who are going to look to beat a horse like Tiz the Law, this is definitely the horse to look at. If you are one of those people, for some reason you still don't believe in Tiz the Law, or you're just a person who under no circumstances would you ever bet a favorite, then this is the horse you're going to want to look at. Regardless of whether or not he wins, I think Uncle Chuck is 100% a Grade 1 caliber horse, and probably will get a Grade 1 win at some point. I'm not going to predict where, but definitely is a really talented horse. I would just say the one question you could have for him is he's not battle-tested.
Yeah, and that's my knock on him as well. I will give him credit, though, that Los Al Derby win, which was visually very impressive for time. He did it all very well. The runner-up in that race, 1,000 words, did come back to win in the Shared Belief last weekend. So while he is, that's really the only good horse beaten in his career, and that is the truth. It's not hard to look at it a different way. But it was a nice win visually, same with the maiden win, and taking all the right progressions. That tells me he's going to contend in this race. And I'm scared of this horse. I've been very high on Tiz the Law all year, even going back to January in that Holy Bull. I really thought that Tiz the Law has no competition in this crop, but I'm scared of Uncle Chuck. He seems like a very viable horse to beat Tiz the Law, even at Tiz the Law's best. Like, he's just done it all right to this point, and I really, leading up to this race, working out really great. I do love that Luis Saez rides back, so everything's telling me this horse is bound to run a really big race and could just upset Tiz the Law in this spot.
And the next horse is the number 4 Max Player, who's coming off of a strong third-place effort in the Belmont Stakes, and prior to that race, he was the winner of the Withers. He was running in the Belmont off of a pretty sizable layoff of 4 months, so, if you're a person who didn't necessarily like him too much off the layoff and you're encouraged by the third-place effort that he had behind Tiz the Law in the Belmont, then you can definitely look to Max Player. I would say that Max Player is probably a horse that I would say, though, probably the underneath, maybe a second or a third for him. I don't think that he's a win contender here, but definitely a solid horse, definitely does deserve to be in a race like this with his past efforts. I just don't think that he's a winner in this race per se.
Yeah, and he proved me wrong in that Belmont effort last time out. I really didn't think he was going to run well off the layoff, but it was a very impressive performance considering time and some of the horses that he beat, and wasn't too far. I mean, he was beaten over 5 lengths by Tiz the Law, but visually it was a very nice run from him. I think he's going to improve off that effort. However, I am a little skeptical. I feel like he's just kind of a horse that needs kind of a pace to run into, and there's not a lot of pace in this race, and that does scare me. The Withers, that wasn't the case, but I think he was just a lot better than that Withers field. No matter what kind of pace the front runners set, fractions they said, I don't think it was ever going to affect Max Player. In this group, it's a whole different ball game. He's going to need something to run at. He is working very nicely though, and Joel Rosario is riding very well, so that does bode well for him. But he's just going to need to have a couple things go his way, whether it's other horses not running their best, or him taking a massive step forward in order for him to win.
The 5 is Shivery, and, if you haven't been following horse racing closely, then, maybe you look at the the Florida Derby that Shivery ran second behind Tiz the Law in. And, you look to him as a horse that you might play in this race. Shivery overall has been consistent in a lot of the races that he has been running. And prior to his last start, which was in the Bluegrass, where he was 11th, he had been, finishing in the money in graded and ungraded stakes races. A race that comes to mind is he was second in the Swale Stakes earlier this year behind Mischievous Alex, who was a grade 2 winner. He won the Gotham Stakes at Aqueduct. So, if you look at the charts and, you look at that and don't really view anything else and kind of draw a line through the Bluegrass, then, maybe you can give yourself a case for this. But obviously drawing a line through the Bluegrass doesn't really make a lot of sense, because it's not like there are very many excuses for him. I thought Shivery was going to run a lot better in the Bluegrass, and, I was disappointed with the effort that he had. And I would say, obviously, he just seems like a cut below the other horses. I did kind of make it seem like I'm giving him a case. I don't want to give the wrong impression with that. I would under no circumstances take Shivery in this race. I would probably say not even put him in the top 4, but, if you're a person who does put a lot of value in past efforts, he did have that second to Tiz the Law in the Florida Derby, and he has been consistent. You have to obviously ask the question of what kind of competition he's facing when he has been consistent, but, I will say he did have that one good run against Tiz the Law, so if you really believe in that Florida Derby Shivery's going to show up, then play him at your own risk, I would say.
Yeah, and I will give this horse the benefit of the doubt. The last 2 races he's ran in, he's really been compromised by, he's a horse that needs to be on or, within a length of the lead. He has to be up close to be contentious. It's just how he is. And 2 races ago, he went very quick early on and folded just towards the end even. He ran a very gutsy race. Last time out, he battled up there with Swiss Skydiver. Art Collector was right up there too. And they went very fast, and those 2 horses are just so good, Art Collector and Swiss Skydiver. They were able to finish very strongly. Shivery's not of that level. He's not going to be able to finish that well going that fast early on. Unlike those 2 races, though, this race, he is the speed. He's going to control the fractions. And unless somebody really tries to go with him, I'm not saying I think he's going to crack the board, but if he runs a race like he ran in the Florida Derby, which he'd really need to return to, I think he has a great chance to at least finish strongly, not be fading late. I think on pure talent alone, I don't think that's what kind of not deters me from him, is that I don't think he's that as talented as most of the horses in this race. But if the race plays out in his favor, he might be able to stick around late for a placing. But I feel like I'm even reaching there. It's more of a talent thing than a lack of setup thing, though.
And the 6th is obviously Tiz the Law. We've been talking about him the entire video. He's the big horse looming over everyone else in this field, and it's really, it's not Tiz the Law and everyone else, because Uncle Chuck is a really fine horse in his own right, but really this entire division, especially with a lot of the injuries and horses being taken out of training, Tiz the Law has been the one consistent horse that has stuck around since the beginning, the one top horse from the beginning of the year, I should say, that has stuck around and has been able to consistently post his impressive wins. And I would say, this year, Tiz the Law has gotten more impressive with each start. He had to overcome some adversity in the Holy Bull. The Florida Derby was a great effort, in the Belmont Stakes last time just took any doubts that I had. I didn't have any doubts, but if there were any that could even creep into imagination, those were gone after the Belmont. And, I would say that I don't want to say that Tiz the Law is unbeatable in this race, because obviously it's horse racing, and we've seen, we saw it last weekend, a couple of big upsets at Saratoga, but, aside from that, taking away all jinxes and everything, Tiz the Law is the best horse in this race. He's the best 3-year-old in the country. I would be extremely shocked if he did not win, or, if he doesn't win, run a really, really solid race here. Eric and I have kind of been joking amongst ourselves that, the one knock that does exist for Tiz the Law is in the Kentucky Jockey Club at Churchill Downs in November. He did have an inside setup, and that was kind of the prevailing thought of, if he gets beat, that's how it's going to happen. We wanted him to draw the 1 to win and kind of take that away, but aside from that, Tiz the Law, there's not really much you can knock him from anything else, any of his other races.
Exactly. Other than that Kentucky Jockey Club loss, which I think he has a very viable excuse from, he's been perfect. He's done it all right. His shortest margin of victory in his career was 3 lengths. That's very impressive to be consistently beating horses comfortably. That Belmont win was so nice. I mean, any doubts people had about that horse should have been wiped away with that win. Beat some very nice horses. This group is not as talented as that group was. That Belmont, really, the top 7 or 8 horses in that race, I felt all were respectable and had a good chance in there. This race, much less horses, I think, have a chance. I think it's a 2-horse race, and I still think Tiz the Law is the best. One thing that I also find really impressive is he takes a lot of time in between races. So I feel like there might be people out there who think, oh, maybe there's too much time between the Belmont and the Travers. It's over 45 days, just under 50 days, really. But that's what he has consistently done throughout his race, about 45 to 50 days between every race, and he runs very well every time. So anything people can come up to knock this horse for, it can easily be deterred. It's on paper, visually, it's all there. He does it all right every single time he runs. I am nervous, though. Like Jack said, last weekend we saw, Tom's D'Etat, Midnight Visu both fall as heavy favorites. Poor break for Tom's D'Etat, just off day for Midnight Visu. Those are the 2 factors I'm most afraid of with this horse, and I'm just hopeful this is not the day they'll show up.
And the 7 horse is Caracarro, who, coming off of a 6-month and change layoff in the Peter Pan, he ran a really respectable second behind Country Grammar. But, you can kind of make the same case or kind of make the same analysis for Caracarro as you had for Country Grammar. He's definitely a horse that is probably going to be a stakes level horse down the road in the future. Definitely probably going to win a graded stakes race. But in a race like this against a horse like Tiz the Law, you really have to ask yourself the question, can he beat Tiz the Law? We already mentioned that Peter Pan field was not the greatest, and they definitely, those 2 horses definitely were not running against a Tiz the Law caliber horse. So you have to ask yourself the question is, would he be able to step up and run a huge race in here? And I would be very hesitant to say that he would be able to do that.
Yeah, and one thing I will say is that I feel like in that Peter Pan, Caracarro was probably the better horse. I just think the layoff ended up getting to him late, but the fact he ran so well off about a 6-month layoff is very impressive. To be beaten second, just a neck behind a horse who'd already been running against some graded stakes level horses. This is his first time against horses that have won races because he was coming off that maiden win in January off the layoff. For him to run that kind of race was very impressive. I think he's very eligible to take a big step forward here and at least maybe hit the board because really, if you run like that well first time off the layoff, I can only imagine you're going to take a sizable step forward your next time out. And for him to run that kind of race and very nearly win a graded stakes last time out was impressive. But like I've said with all the other horses, I know I'm kind of just repeating myself to an extent. It's really just, can he beat the better horses in this race? And like Jack said, I don't think he's much better than a graded stakes level horse. He's a good horse, but not grade 1 in my opinion.
And the last horse we're going to talk about is the number 8, South Bend. Like I mentioned, he's been bouncing around a lot of black-type races between running on turf, running on the dirt. Last time he was second in the Ohio Derby behind Dean Martini. I will say, just kind of being nice about this horse, obviously first line is the toss because he hasn't run against a graded stakes level field. And I would say, this horse, even though he has been multiple graded stakes placed, you really have to look at this horse and say, he hasn't been running really well in graded stakes caliber. The graded stakes fields that he's been placing in, you wouldn't say that any of those horses could run really well in the Travers. And that's ultimately what I would say about this horse right here, South Bend. I don't think that he's going to... It's another example of a horse that's not going to step up, but I would say, not stepping up would be a little bit too generous for this horse. I don't think he's got the potential to run better than a horse like Shivery, or I would say he's probably on the line with first line, even though he has more experience in that horse. So ultimately, not really much nice things to say about him. He's a toss for me. I don't have anything that I can give to him that I would think he offers at the table.
Yeah, and his Ohio Derby run was very well, but that field was nothing pretty to look at. It was a fun race, but he didn't beat much of anything in that second place effort. Came running late. Even though Belmont, he is pretty decent when he gets a horse for their first start, as he is with with this horse, but I really think that the new owners that privately purchased him, were kind of just grasping at a Derby contender, and that's why they picked him up. And because of the circumstances this year, no matter how he runs in this race, they can probably still run him. I will give him credit. He was beaten about 4 starts back. He was second, beaten just a length and a quarter behind Decorated Invader. So he's actually the horse that's been closest to Decorated Invader all year this year, and we all know what Decorated Invader is capable of. So that's impressive. But that was also on the grass. He's been well beaten in the majority of his 3 other big dirt attempts outside of that win as a 2-year-old, which was another weak group. And I think that's just the common theme for this horse. He's been losing to horses that are better than him, and the horses he's beating are not much better than him. And I just think that I don't think he's necessarily a toss, because I feel like this is one of those horses that on any given day could run an absolute huge race out of nowhere and magically hit the board somehow. But I question whether this is the race for him to do that, because the top 3 or 4 in this race are very good, much better than South Bend.
And getting into what our top 3s for this race are, again, we're sticking with the theme at Saratoga this summer. It's been very, very chalky. I don't know what the percentages are, but especially in these graded stakes races, it seems like most of the favored horses have been, at the very minimum, running in the money, and most of them have been winning. So, unfortunately, I don't really have much to put in to spice up the trifecta. Obviously, you can tell by the way we've been talking, I'm going to go with Tizelaw on top. Give Uncle Chuck credit for him being a really talented horse and put him second. I'm going to put Caracarro in for third. I think, Eric made the point about how he was probably the best horse in the Peter Pan. I think second start back off the layoff is definitely going to benefit him, but I don't think I can put him any higher than third place.
And I'm in full agreement there. For me, it's obviously Tizelaw on top, Uncle Chuck second. And I do like Caracarro for third, but I'll throw an alternative just because I don't want to, say the same exact top 3 as Jack, and, it'd be boring. I will say Shivery. If he's able to set a slow enough pace for himself, he's going to get beat on talent. He's going to be mowed down late by Uncle Chuck and Tizelaw, but if he's able to stick around and grind it out like he typically does in most races, minus that Bluegrass last time out, then he might just crack third. But I do really think it's between Tizelaw and Uncle Chuck, and it's going to be a fun race, no doubt. Some horses are going to put on some big performances, but it's the top half. It's very top heavy. That's the way I'll put it. Top heavy race.
So again, like I mentioned, Jay Priven will be joining us later on this week, probably on Friday, for discussing the Travers Stakes a little bit further with him. We will see you for that. Thank you for stopping by. If you do play the race this weekend, good luck. And I will also mention that we will have other previews for the graded stakes on the Travers card. So the Test and the Ballerina, also 2 7-furlong sprints for 3-year-old fillies and then elders, respectively. So we'll have those later. We'll have Jay later this week, and we will see you later this week.
Mito's Derby. It's Uncle Chuck, 1,000 Words throwing out a challenge. Great Power back to third. Cosmo battles on. They have 3/16 left to go, and it's Uncle Chuck by 1 length. 1,000 Words is trying hard to get on terms, but Uncle Chuck has the lead. He's clear. He's increasing his margin coming past the 16th pole. Uncle Chuck racing away from 1,000 Words. Uncle Chuck by 3. 1,000 Words second. Cosmo was 6 away third, then Great Power.